Kathy was standing near the departure area of the Amtrak Southern Crescent at Union Station in Washington, D.C. She hoped to be on board the train and gone by the time Eric got home. Kathy really wanted to drive home to Clemson, South Carolina, but she knew her car would not make the trip. So, she purchased the train ticket. The day before, Kathy had looked at their bank accounts and seen that Eric's pay had been deposited and looked at the balance in their joint account. Deciding to take only $1,000 plus the cost of the train ticket, she went home and packed a bag. That night Eric ate in silence. Kathy sat across from Eric in their small apartment and ate as she thought about the last 6 months. How do you tell a husband you are bored and want to change your life? Kathy thought to herself as she ate. In the end, Kathy called herself a coward and decided not to tell Eric she was leaving that next afternoon. Kathy had spoken to her mother earlier and asked her to pick her up at the Clemson train station. Her parents lived about 15 minutes north of Clemson and both worked at the Oconee nuclear station that Duke Power operated. Both had great jobs and raised Kathy and her 2 brothers in the area. Her mother said to call her when you get to Greenville because the train had a history of being late. Kathy heard the train 19 announcement made and they were boarding first-class passengers. Kathy's mother called her job and said she would be late and asked for that morning off. Then she went to bed. Kathy boarded the train, was directed to her small cabin, and after some time eating a sandwich went to bed. Eric came home to a cold and dark apartment. He muttered some obscenities as he looked for Kathy and finally found her note pinned to the small board on the wall. "Damn her," Eric said as he wadded up the note and threw it into a corner of the room. Eric got out his laptop and checked his bank account. She only took $1,600 out of the account, too much, but Kathy did leave most of it alone. Eric was about to close the laptop and go get some dinner when he thought about sending in a work order to have the keys changed in case Kathy attempted to come back. After sending the work order, he left and grabbed a burger and a beer. Eric woke up and looked at the clock and saw it was only 4 a.m. and decided to get up and take a shower. Yawning as he walked into the kitchen, he decided to make some coffee, and as he did so he decided to stay home and not make the drive to his job at the Smithsonian, a job he had held for almost 10 years. It also was a job he had been giving serious thought to leaving and taking Henry up on his offer to join his startup in Florida. Since he was staying at home, he would walk down to the apartment manager's office and see about getting the door lock changed. After he ate breakfast, Eric called his boss and told him that Kathy had left him and he was not in any condition to work that day and requested a leave day that was instantly granted. The apartment manager told Eric he would be up to the apartment by lunchtime to change out the lock, but there was a $25 charge that would be added to the next rent payment. Eric agreed and walked back to the apartment. Eric started looking around to see that Kathy had left most of her things. He guessed that Kathy packed light and was expecting to return. Eric opened a box that held his adult movie collection, put a DVD in and sat down to wait for the manager to come fix the lock. About that same time, Kathy was about an hour out of Charlotte, North Carolina and rolling south toward Greenville. She did not bring any food with her and opened a water and sipped on it as she sat and thought about things. Kathy had expected to get a phone call or text from Eric, but after looking at her phone there was nothing showing. She also decided to plug in the charger and charge it. As she sat back down, she started to feel an unease that started in her belly that something was wrong. Eric should have called her. "Damn him," Kathy said. Kathy could hear the conductor say, "Greenville," as he walked by her cabin, and she called her mom. "Mom, we are in Greenville." "Okay honey, I am at the Publix store in Central and plan to be at the station in about 15 or so minutes." "Okay mama, I will see you soon," and she ended the call. "Clemson," the conductor called out, and Kathy opened her door and left the cabin and made her way to the exit, and as the conductor helped her stepped off the train and exited to the station where she saw her mother waving. "Kate, I have cold stuff I need to get home, so let's go." Kathy was named after her maternal grandmother, and even though she hated to be called Kate, her family always called her Kate. On the way, her mom asked what Eric was doing. "Honestly mama, I have no idea, I have left him." I am going to need some help in a few days to get a rental van and go get my things. Kathy's mom gave her a look that if looks could kill, she was in trouble. Not another word was said. After she dropped Kathy off and put away the groceries, she walked into her bedroom and put her work clothes on. Then walked into the bedroom where Kathy was and said, "Kate, I need to go to work. Your dad will be home around 4 p.m. and I am going to try to find something to do so I can get my 8 hours in for today. I am expecting you to have something on the table for your dad when he gets home, understand, Kate?" she said as she raised her voice. "Yes, Mama, I will feed him tonight." "Kate, he knows you are here, tell him the truth about why you are here." Then she left the house and went to work. By 4 Kathy had finished the pork chops and made mashed potatoes and opened some mixed vegetables for him. She also was bothered by the silence coming from Eric. Still, Kathy decided to make a phone call using a phone number she knew from memory. It was to Greg, her first high school crush. When he answered, Kathy started to cry and they talked for a while and agreed to meet. Kathy and her parents settled in, and that next weekend Kathy was able to get her brother Steve to rent a van and they drove it north toward Washington. After a long drive, Steve and Kathy parked in the parking lot of her apartment and quickly discovered her key did not work. The manager had noticed her walking in and followed her up. Eric had the locks changed. "Well, can I get a key?" Kathy asked the manager. "No, Kathy," he said, "Eric was clear you left and was not allowed back inside." By this time Eric had heard the voices outside and opened the door. Kathy just looked at Eric and said, "Okay, can I at least get my things?" Eric looked at the manager and he said, "Kathy, your things have been moved. They are boxed up in an apartment I am getting ready to rent in a few weeks." "So just like that you have just moved on without me," Kathy said. "Oh yes, I have," Eric spit back. "In fact, just a minute." Eric walked back into the apartment and came back with some papers. "These are my copies of the divorce I have filed against you, Kathy. Since these are copies, you can have them. Your copies are coming. I have sent a text to my attorney, and he should be here by the time you get your things to serve you." Just like that, Eric, you are going to throw away everything because I made a mistake in judgment and went home. Kathy, there are 3 months left on the lease here. I am leaving the Smithsonian and moving to Florida. I plan to donate all the furniture and beds to Goodwill. Most of the things like sheets and towels are packed up for you. So are the photo albums. By this time Kathy was crying so bad her words made no sense, and Steve finally helped her to the van and he and Eric loaded the boxes into the van. When they finished, Eric motioned for Kathy to open her window. "Kathy, I have donated your car, but you are still my wife, and I am not leaving you without a car. Henry has hired me to work at his startup and I won't be needing my car. I will drive it to the airport in Charlotte and park it." "Do you still have your key to it?" Eric asked. Kathy looked at her keys and said, "Yes, Eric, I do. Since we have no kids and own no house, I think a fair thing would be for us to split things 50-50, Eric said. "Kathy," Eric said, "if you fight me on this or ask for support, you won't like the outcome. I will leave my keys to the car in the glove box and will text you the parking location. It will be your job to pay the parking fee. I will give you enough notice so that the car won't rack up a large parking bill." "Wait," Kathy screamed at Eric as she got out of the van. "Please, Eric, let's go to Florida together." By this time Kathy was on her knees. Eric took Kathy by the hand and raised her up. "Kathy," Eric said as he started to speak. "Listen to me carefully. I have to have a wife I can trust to be there when times get tough, somebody that when I look behind me is rolling up her sleeves getting ready to go to work, not somebody that as soon as things get tough when I look around all I see is her rear end flopping as she runs away. I loved you, Kathy. I think there is a part of me that always will. But I can't trust you anymore. Oh, one more thing, Kathy. How do I know you have not run off to see an old boyfriend? Kathy, go back to South Carolina and have a good life." Eric turned and walked away, now ignoring Kathy's pleas to talk to her. About that same time Eric's attorney walked up to Kathy and after asking her name he served her the papers and left. Kathy was crying as Steve cranked up the van and pulled out on the main road that would take them back to the Washington Beltway and on to home. About an hour went by when Steve looked over at Kathy and asked her if Eric knew about Greg. Kathy turned and gave Steve a dirty look and said, "How do you know about Greg?" Steve laughed and said, "First off, Greg and I both work at the Square D plant in Seneca, and he told me you and he had been together. Greg also has been spreading it all over the plant. I would imagine our folks know about it by now." Now Kathy understood Eric's comment about an old boyfriend. Steve stopped to get a hotel room for him and his sister. Had a pizza ordered and they split it. After she laid down to attempt to sleep, Kathy's mind started to replay the events of the past few weeks. Greg and his big mouth, she thought. Before she left Steve's room, she heard Steve say, "Mama is not happy, little sister. I would not plan on living with them for much longer." As she went to sleep, Kathy thought about her life and what she will do after her divorce is final. 3 years later, Kathy was living in a small apartment she shared with two other friends from work. Kathy's dad helped her get a job at the BMW plant and she was happy. She did okay in the divorce and only had to make one trip back to Maryland to get it final. Greg turned into a loser who lost his driver's license and had already been stopped by a highway patrolman driving drunk and without a license. Most likely was headed to some serious time. Kathy was with some friends eating at a local Spartanburg diner when her mama called her and said, "Kate, Eric is looking for you. He did not have your new phone number and wanted to catch up. Don't blow this chance with Eric, honey." She told Kathy Eric had a new Florida phone number and gave it to her. When she called Eric, he was in his hotel room. So, Kathy drove to the hotel and knocked on Eric's door. She was surprised when a very pregnant redhead opened the door. Kathy stood in shock. Eric was walking out of the bathroom and invited Kathy in. "Kathy," Eric said after a few minutes, "Bree and I are headed back to Maryland to handle some business and I wanted to give you some documents I discovered after I started to unpack after getting to Florida." Eric pulled out an envelope and handed it to Kathy. "Kathy, inside that envelope is some insurance information from about 4 years ago." It was showing where a claim had been paid out to an OBGYN. Kathy started to cry. "Kathy, were you pregnant?" Eric asked. "Eric, I was, but ended it." "Was it mine, Kathy?" Eric asked. "No, Eric, it was Greg's and I know you already knew about him." Eric stood up and asked Kathy to leave. His last words were, "I know you were raised Catholic, I suggest you find a confessional." "I am sorry I ever knew you." Eric slammed the door shut. Kathy just walked back to her car and returned home.